Dear guests, colleagues, and friends, good evening and welcome to the public lecture, Democracy and Capitalism, or Economic Democracy. My name is Lucas Peter. Together with my colleagues Alice El-Wakil and Leah Hein from the association DemocracyNet.eu, and as main organizers of this event, we are extremely glad to see so many of you here tonight. This lecture is part of an event series called Democracy, Bridging Facts and Norms. We have been able to organize this series thanks to the financial support of the university's graduate campus throughout the academic year 2015-2016. The main aim of this project is to open the discussion about the relationship between democratic ideals and realities. This discussion takes place on two levels. On the one hand, democracy is studied from a number of academic disciplines that often don't communicate much with each other. We therefore have organized two academic workshops with young researchers from various disciplines, one of which took place today and will continue tomorrow. The aim of these workshops is to provide young researchers with an opportunity to go beyond or bridge narrow academic disciplines and to encourage future collaboration between these fields. On the other hand, we also want to contribute to the ongoing public debates on democracy in relation to its demands, its limits, and its requirements, to create a bridge between the scientific community and the wider public. In our first public event, we gathered academics and politicians for discussion on the possible limits of democracy. The second event focused on justice, democracy, and the unconditional basic income, with a challenging debate between Philipp van Parijs and Rainer Eichenberger. Tonight's event raises another series of questions about democracy. In what social context can democracy exist? And more specifically, in what economic system can it best be developed? We are extremely pleased that Alex Demirovic accepted our invitation to come to Zurich in order to participate in our workshop and to talk here about the relationship between democracy and capitalism. As an advocate of economic democracy, we hope to bring a quite fundamental, political, and somewhat, I'd say, tabooed topic both back into academia and into the more general public debates on politics and economics. We also would like to thank Andreas Scherer for joining us tonight as a critical discussant, as well as Vanessa Rampton for moderating the debate. And last but not least, we are also thankful for our collaboration with the organization DenkNetz, the Ethics Center of the University of Zurich, the research project NCCR Democracy, and the Zentrum für Demokratie in Aarau, who all helped to promote the event. Before finishing, I would like to take the opportunity to already announce our next and last event. On the 20th of October, we will discuss the role of science, researchers, and intellectuals in public debates and democratic politics with Katja Gentinetta, Per Thuysen, Thomas Wittmer, and others. We are already looking forward to seeing you there. But for now, I will pass the microphone on to the moderator of this evening, Vanessa Rampton. Vanessa Rampton is currently a postdoctoral researcher at the Institute of Philosophy at the ETH here in Zurich. After a PhD on freedom and liberalism in Russia at King's College at the University of Cambridge, she is now working on a project on moral progress with the title Harder, Better, Faster, Stronger, Ideas of Progress in Liberal Theory. We thank you for moderating the event, and we wish everyone an interesting and illuminating evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lucas, for the introduction, and it's my pleasure to introduce the speakers and to moderate the discussion tonight. We're very excited to have Professor Alex Demirovic as our speaker. Professor Demirovic is currently at the Goethe University in Frankfurt, where he has been since 2007. He has held many visiting professorships in Germany and abroad, and also worked for more than 10 years at the Institute for Social Research in Frankfurt. Professor Demirovic is well known as an international expert in critical theory, in democratic theory, and also on the structures or the apparatuses of capitalism. He's published numerous books and articles of relevance to our topic tonight on economic democracy, on governance, on capitalism and its crisis, or perhaps we should say crises in the plural. Probably the most pertinent monograph publication of his is the book Wirtschaft und Demokratie that was published in 2007. It seems to me that one of the quite unique or noteworthy things about Professor Demirovic's work is its invigorating character. And even as he's devoted a great deal of his career to pointing out the flaws of democracy, how it fails to live up to its ideals, he has never failed to bring to the fore the potential, the prospects, and the promise of democracy. This seems to be a very, very valuable contribution. And perhaps one could say that the lecture he's about to give on democracy and capitalism is a culmination of a long-standing research interest in probing the relationship between politics and economics, between state authority on the one hand and the economic structure of society on the other. And since clarifying that relationship between democracy and capitalism is, I think, one of the great challenges of our time, it's with great pleasure that I welcome Professor Demirovic. But just with regards to how we're going to proceed, there will now be a lecture by Professor Demirovic that will last approximately 40 minutes. We're then going to have a 20-minute discussion between the panelists before kind of opening up the floor and taking questions from the audience. So, Professor Demirovic, the floor is yours. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the invitation to present some of my ideas here, and also for the warm welcome and all the promises you made. I will not fulfill it, but I try my best to give you an idea what my argument is about economic democracy. You already mentioned in your introduction one of the key words that I was concerned with during the last years after the outbreak of the crisis in 2007 and 2008, the concept of multiple crises. Yeah, what was an issue we discussed about in ATTAC, where I'm engaged, and then I published a book on this problem of multiple crises and the interconnection of several crises we are experiencing, not only in Germany. There are crises in plural all over the world and in Europe, and you all know about many aspects about these different crises that had or lead it almost to a ruin, to a destruction of our societies. When you think of what happened in Switzerland in these years and in the Eurozone, and still it's going on in the Eurozone, more so in the southern periphery of Europe. It's not only the finance crisis, it's a broader economic crisis, it's also a crisis in the whole field of an environment, the ecological crisis, and so on and so on. So I don't want to go into the details of all those crisis phenomena we are concerned with. And part of this is also a crisis of democracy. Yeah, that means a crisis in the representation of the parties and also the state itself. It's not only a lack in the crisis of representation between parties and the people, but it's also a general crisis of the state apparatus, and this had much to do with the problem of globalization since the 90s and a loss of sovereignty, and this includes also the crisis of how democracy can have an impact or control over the whole area of economic processes. So now this is just an introductory remark to come to this more general, or so to speak, more focused problem of democracy and capitalism. According to a bourgeois self-conception, the market and democracy are not only interconnected historically, but also logically. In this case, a crisis of market processes would have to go hand in hand with a crisis of democracy. However, this poses the question of the cause and effect. From a liberal point of view, the market is seriously disturbed by political intrusion into the self-regulatory economic laws of supply and demand. The competences of democratic institutions are then said to be overstretched. In order to comply with the electorate or their own interests, politicians would tend to transcend the logic of political institutions, which had originally served to guarantee the general framework for a smooth functioning of economic processes. This is the liberal perspective. From a social democratic left perspective, such state intervention is considered both necessary and desirable. Necessary because internally, economic reproduction itself leads to crisis. Thus, correction by state regulation is required. To achieve this, there is a comprehensive set of political instruments which function through the state revenue derived from taxes, public sector, borrowing and state-owned companies, and through regulation and money spent in the labor market, education and training, infrastructure or research, in foreign trade or currency. Such intervention is considered desirable because it is in keeping with the interests of voters, that is, it secures a broad democratic basis for the state. Market and democracy allegedly involve different logics of action. In the case of the market, the logic is that of money, the stability of its value and the capacity to create demand associated with this stability. I would like to argue here that the state and representative democracy, though this is a third perspective, are autonomous, and that therefore political action in the area of the state actually follows a different logic. Yet this logic does not fundamentally stand in contradiction to capitalist conditions. The basis for this assertion is that the capitalist mode of production is in part defined by the separation of relations of production from state authority. Authority assumes the political form of the state. Under capitalist conditions, the appropriation of social wealth occurs in the form of private, legal relations between formally equal and free participants in the markets. Under normal conditions, the tasks of general importance and delegated in the state by property owners pursuing their private interests, with the state protecting these owners but not itself possessing power or itself becoming a super owner. Political authority is to guarantee the cohesion of the owners of capital who are privately competing against each other, but who are very few in numbers and moreover do not bear arms when we compare this historically and with feudalism. So competing against each other vis-à-vis the social classes they exploit and to guarantee protection from external dangers. The state has three tasks in particular. A, to guarantee the general conditions of reproduction: money, measures, taxes, the law, education, traffic. B, to organize the control over and consensus among the ruled elites and classes. And C, foreign trade and military protection. Yet, this transfer of power does not just relieve the owners of the responsibility of ruling. From now on, they also have to be on their guard that the general interest of the state is not determined by particular interest groups in such a way that they are themselves put into a disadvantaged position. Inevitably, there will be conflicts over the definition of the common good, since the interests of the individual owners of capital in relation to each other and also in relation to those ruled are different. Some of them require a well-trained workforce, seek defense contracts with the state or extensive infrastructure measures. Others consider these to be unnecessary burdens and a competitive disadvantage. To prevent the division of the common good from being arbitrarily taken over by the state administration or particular forces among the elites and the bourgeois class, Parliament was developed as a political organ. It makes the formation of political will and decision-making transparent. In shaping the future negotiation between the different and partly very contradictory interests of the bourgeois class can produce an equilibrium. Decisions once made can be revised. Elections and party coalitions make it possible to give a temporary position of predominance to other interest constellations in an orderly way. Through parties, a politically calculable, identifiable, and accountable political personnel is established whose task is to assert the will of Parliament vis-à-vis the administration, so that compromises once arrived at and mediated by the public administration and the national media and public spaces can be implemented over the entire territory of the state as a collective will. This is by no means to be taken for granted, because the unification of administration is in itself a political activity. And in several spaces, particular constellations of power and compromise can develop, which can fragment the administration. I want to be very clear. My thesis is not that democratic politics is functionally subordinated to the imperatives of capital valorization, competitiveness, or accumulation. In fact, it is the other way around. The state is that political form in which the different elites and factions, ruling factions, organize itself themselves as a ruling class. Politics is autonomous, because only by this autonomy is it possible for those forces to strike a balance between their own divergent interests without undermining their common foundations of appropriating the living labor power of wage dependence, of the valorizing and exploiting of nature, and of sexist and racist control over human beings. Representative democracy should not be understood from the perspective of formal, equal, and general suffrage. It is a form in which the fundamental bourgeois conflict between the general and the specific is fought out. The general and the particular interest is fought out. In this conflict, there have always been attempts to appropriate power of the state in favor of the conception of the interest held by particular groups, and in that way to bring the democratic process to a halt. Therefore, the bourgeoisie has created a number of civil society forums for discussion, committees, organizations, and networks which closely monitor the state and civil society itself. They are to guarantee that society is not disturbed in its reproduction, the state is not weakened, and their respective interests not ignored. In case of crisis, through civil society processes of reaching consensus, agreements can be reached to disempower parliaments and transfer their power to special state apparatus. In cases of exceptional state, it is military, the police, or a kind of a fascist party. Such consensus-finding processes also include the interests of segments of the lower class in order to form respective alliances with them. Such alliances can be very comprehensive and can affect labor relations, wages, and social transfer, consumption, education, opportunities for upward mobility, or the right to participate. Even the number of jobs made available in the public sector is a means of such a class compromise, as we just learned from Brazil when you followed the news during these days, when the new government just extended the number of state officials. Parliamentary representative democracy is never completely secure. It repeatedly comes under pressure because individual groups of the ruling class and their spokespersons ask themselves if the complicated processes of negotiation are not too restrictive and do not hamper their future freedom of decision too much. In the young history of parliamentary democracy, which in the OECD states was more or less fully established only after the First and more completely after the Second World War, there have been recurrent crises of democracy. Major crises occurred, such as the exceptional form of fascist state or military dictatorships. On a less existential level, democratic mechanisms are hollowed out or threatened by emergency laws, as we're experiencing now in France, or the temporary suspension of civil rights, by employment bans, secret service operations, police provocations, measures of the surveillance of party members, or publications, as well as police measures. Prohibited zones for demonstrations requiring demonstrators to register with the police and so on. The surveillance of public space and through corruption and informal power networks, as well as secret networks, P2 Lodge in Italy or Deep State in Turkey. On the civil society level, anti-democratic forces such as right-wing or right populist parties, magazines, publishing houses, music bands or groups and gangs prone to violence represent a permanent menace. Thus, there are always crises of democracy. It is the form that vary. At any rate, there is a kind of pacification or reassurance discourse that also belongs to parliamentary democracy, in which the ruling forces convinces themselves or let themselves be convinced that although there may be bourgeois authoritarian alternatives to parliamentary democracy, the latter is still the best of all bad political forms, as Churchill pointed out. Each faction knows that it cannot permanently assert its power if it attempts a permanent occupation of the political institutions of the state in its own interest. Pacification consists in the self-assurance that decisions made in Parliament take different interests into account. That is, that they are based on compromises and a wide range of information, that in case of doubt, these decisions can be taken back, thus avoiding obstacles and counter-mobilizations that could impede their implementation. In fact, the complexity of the decision-making process helps make the decisions last longer, make them more efficient, and generates less resistance. This also holds true as regards the lower classes. They are included, their representatives are involved in a broad network of participatory bodies, parliament, broadcasting corporations, social security agencies, and so on. And their interests are taken into account. This taking into account of the interests of the lower classes requires concessions on the part of the bourgeois class, and not only restricts the room for maneuver in political decisions, but also the power of control over societal wealth. Neoliberalism can be understood as a strategy to dissolve the compromise established through and embodied by parliamentary and democratic institutions, and to abandon any concessions to the subaltern social classes, or to adopt them only in a very flexible and temporary way. The Fordist class compromise that lasted until the mid of the 70s was attacked by varying degrees of ferocity and dissolved, and with it the welfare state democracy of the post-war era, which was based on it. To describe this phenomenon, Colin Crouch has developed the much-discussed concept of post-democracy. Although it accurately captures certain phenomena, it does not completely fit the situation. With it, Crouch denotes the fact that elections are still held, yet the majority of citizens play only a passive role, with real politics being made by the elected governments and elites behind closed doors and in favor of the economy. Frustration and disillusionment are described as spreading. This critique, correct as it is, hardly describes something new, as such trends have been continually observable for many decades. To be sure, these phenomena are not benign, but at the same time they reveal little of what is particular to the current situation. In addition, Crouch's critique tends to make us passive. If in the 60s, as with Johannes Agnoli or Jürgen Habermas, just to refer to two German authors, there was an impulse to revitalize democracy. Crouch's theses are problematic in that he derives a sort of inevitable decline of democracy from this development. We are said to have arrived at the end of the parable of democracy as a political system. The arrival of post-democracy cannot be reversed. In this, Crouch is not pleading for a comprehensive new version of the project of democracy, which could go beyond a mere reform of political democracy and comprise our entire social coexistence and relationship to nature. At best, he sees a possibility of delaying the current negative development somewhat. So this is the background of my argument in favor for economic democracy, to give you an idea what is discussed or what is critical about the situation of democracy. And just to summarize the argument is to say that what we have as a political form of parliamentarian democracy is not able to tackle the problems, the process of more and more socialization of processes produce. So that means the appropriation of nature, the globalization process, the migration processes, and so on and so on. So the national-wide or national limited representative democracy is not enough, and we have to think about ways to extend the whole sphere of democracy. So to extend the general suffrage, to all social spheres. So it's not, in my eyes, it's not the economic sphere, the only sphere to which we have to extend democracy, but so we can also do this with regard to other social relations, like the relation between partners in how to say, it's not love, it's not, but you know, in all these intimate relations, between parents and children and so on, or in the universities, in schools. So we have a whole range of possibilities to enlarge our democratic decision-making process in different fields. But for me, it was the economic democracy is something important, because in economy we organize, or the most part of our appropriation of nature, the way how we establish huge technological systems like mobility systems, or mobility and transport systems, or an energy production, and so on. And so these things are not under public and democratic control, but more or less under the control of private actors following their interests. And so far as I argued here, the state has to, without any power, has to fulfill the needs of those strategies, to make sure that competitiveness is reached, and so on. So what I want to do next is to give you an idea of arguments I want to make with regard to economic democracy. And the background is debates in some of the German trade unions. So this is the background I had in the, as you remarked already, in 2005, 2006, 2007, that the German trade unions, they had the very clear idea that under the new conditions of globalization, the pressure of the labor market and so on, they have to actualize, to renew the concept of economic democracy that was or still is in a way a common practice in German or in a part of the German enterprises, corporations, but they think of how they can extend these forms of participation. So I go into this in a paper here, or another part of a paper in which I develop some of the arguments. So there are 10 minutes left, is it right?
Yep, 12.
12 minutes, okay. So what is about the relation of economy and the political sphere is in some respect the relation of necessity and freedom. So this is how it is discussed very often when you think of Hannah Arendt. Yeah? So the idea is the political sphere is the sphere of freedom, of free action, and the economy is the realm of necessity. The market, the mute constraint of the economic conditions, appear as a sphere of necessity and therefore as a borderline of democracy. Closely connected to democracy is the idea of freedom, which the popular sovereign has to decide upon himself and all his members, provided that it deals with a collective interest. This is the major difference between the range of democracy and the range of economy. While in the later case, the individuals have to adapt to regularities if they are not willing to perish and to lose their subsistence, and the economy is only considered to be a sphere of necessity, which is not to be collectively defined, but at best to be utilized only by single economic subjects. Democracy wants to allow that the decisions applying to all are made with the involvement of all. The collectively binding decisions are not being imposed, but are supposed to be the result of joint action. This applies to the single decisions made as well as the processes in which the decisions are being made. This raises the question what democratization of economy means. And this is a long story of theoretical debates that goes back in the German context until the period before World War I. But there is also a discussion in France about autogestion or in England or on industrial democracy. So I refer here to some aspects of the German debate that we had since the late 20s. And you have to have in mind that the discussion on economic democracy was brought forward to resist against fascism, because the discussion was about in the late 20s in the trade unions, the German trade unions, but in a very late period, so in which already, if to say so, in terms of Nikos Poulantzas, the point of no return of the fascist taking of power already was successful. So it was really very late and in a way too late, of course. So the classic concept of democratization of economy, so far it was discussed until the 60s and 70s, remained completely state-centered. The formula of the federal German constitutional state to be a social and democratic constitutional state was interpreted in a way that the elected legislator would have the right to intervene even in social processes. Politics had, as viewed by Wolfgang Abendroth, one of the few left-wing socialist theoreticians of Western Germany in the 50s and 60s, the right to regulate and reschedule societal processes to their basics through the law. It is not important whether this consideration is realistic. Politically, it was never implemented. However, one of its weaknesses is obvious. The economy can only be democratically maintained when detouring through representative parties, the parliament and the executive power. Democratic guidance of the economy basically means the state parameters are set, taxes, tariffs, technical standards, or legal norms. That the government takes steps which weaken the power of single economic operators and strengthen the power of others, unions. That it is actively operated in areas such as education, employment, promotion, research, investment, infrastructures. The government intervening in economic processes and entangling itself with these, becoming more and more a state of the society in which the society represents itself, softens the rigid borderline between economy and government drawn by liberalism. This is particularly true when the state is a direct proprietor of companies. Abendroth was able to support through his argumentation in favor of the participation on the level of businesses and supervisory boards. However, the economic processes, the decision processes within the companies are not democratized. Many of those who are immediately involved in the decisional processes do not gain greater participative rights, but are still subjected to the hierarchies of the companies and to the capital owner's command. The constraints mediated by the employment market are at best mitigated, and the employees' rights are ensured with more stability. I argue in that way that it is a state-centered concept of economic democracy, and we have to be critical about it when we refer again to these concepts. And there is a discussion in the German trade unions and also in a lot of groups, referring to these concepts of Wolfgang Abendroth, which seem to be very attractive, to come back to an understanding of what the competences of state regulation could reach in the field of economy, and to renew the control over economic processes. What is important in my eyes, and so far the discussion on economic democracy developed further during the last years, that more and more I think the idea is that we have to have economic democracy from below, not in that way of a state-centered process. And because time is running, so I just want to mention that there are several approaches to renew the idea of economic democracy on different levels. I just want to introduce this concept and not explain it here, but maybe we can come back to this in the discussion, that we have these different levels of introduction of democratic procedures or institutions on a micro, on a meso, on a macro level, also in the economic sphere. And then there are authors like Michael Albert who elaborate on the idea that how we can articulate these different levels of the economic sphere and how we can solve problems, because the problems that are traditionally known as severe problems of economic democracy, that means the relation of the production and the relation to consumption, and because what is clear that market processes fail to organize this relation, but this is also the case with state planning processes. Yeah, they also fail to bring these two processes together. And Michael Albert, he argues in favor for a kind of a reiteration process between these two different levels of production and consumption, and a kind of a construction of a circle that brings, is a kind of a continuous debate on what is needed, and to elaborate on the experiences made with the scale of products and the consumption demands. So just to mention this and to say that this is this kind of, how to say, direct, this idea of direct democracy, a democracy from below, is in my eyes enriching the whole debate on economic democracy. And to come to the last sentence, I think, or the last, to underline the problem, or why it's necessary in my eyes to come back to these debates and to continue with it, is the problem that, as I mentioned, that so many problems are not solved with regard to the ecological crisis, the problem of poverty among so many people, 15–20% in our societies, the problem of false allocation of resources and means of production, the problem of innovation systems. And I think we need to bring in the democratic will formation into those processes that cannot be solved on a level of corporations that are under pressure of a worldwide competition and undergoing the risk to lose the ability to react to those social problems we have to deal with. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much for this thought-provoking and wide-ranging lecture. We're now going to hold the discussion. So I'll introduce our discussant, who is Professor Andreas Scherer. He holds the chair of Foundations of Business Administration and Theories of the Firm here at the University of Zurich. Professor Scherer has published extensively in business ethics, corporate social responsibility, and another one of his research interests is globalization and what this means for expanding the traditional role of business firms. And one of the reasons I think it's really wonderful to have Professor Scherer as a discussant is that his research is anchored in the behavior of firms and of corporations, so the owners of capital that you were talking about. Professor Scherer has played a leading role in exploring the way that at times economic actors take on what are actually political roles, and once again in a way that's perhaps similar to Professor Demirovic's interest, has been concerned with demarcating or perhaps blurring the division between political democratic processes at the level of the nation state, and then, on the other hand, what it is that private businesses do. So I think this is a very complementary way of approaching the topic of democracy and capitalism, and we're all very interested to hear whether you also think that economic democracy is what's needed, or perhaps there's something else. But Professor Scherer, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much for the invitation, and thank you for this very interesting presentation from which I learned a lot. I was asked to make a critical comment, and for me this is difficult for several reasons. First of all is that I base my work also on critical theory, so I do not really feel very competent in order to criticize somebody coming from Frankfurt, but rather I see my remark more as an addition to what has been said, and also to put this discussion in context, because normally it's the other way around, that I import ideas from critical theory, philosophy, political philosophy, theory, democracy, and write texts that are addressed to economists. And here, as far as I see, it's mainly that there are political philosophers, political scientists, so it's a different audience, and you have to keep this in mind when you think about what I will now say. So this said, I think that this, what we have just heard was a very good reconstruction of the role of the democratic rule of law state, and how it emerged in history, and how its function can be explained, how it was challenged, how it adapted. And such a reconstruction is what it is. It's a reconstruction of an ideal type, and this is not true or false, but is an ideal type which we can use to analyze what the phenomena we observe in the real world. So what we observe in the real world, in a way, differs from the reconstruction that has been suggested here. However, the reconstruction has a value in itself because it has analytical strengths, and what I notice is that both in political science as much as in economics, there's this idea of strict separation of political realms and economic realms, and in political realm it's the state as the only political actor who defines the rules, and hopefully in a democratic way defines and enforces the rules vis-à-vis society. And within society, the private actors, companies stick to the rules. And so this is, let's say, the model on which much of economic theory is based, and which is then used also as a justification for business firms that they can and should focus on making profit only, because taking care of public concerns is not the business of business, but instead is the task of the state. So this is the ideal type model. But this model has in a way become challenged for several reasons, because on the one hand one could say, well, the state has never been able to really design perfect rules that direct the action of selfish actors in a way so that the results of their actions contribute to the public interest. So a state has never been able to do that, so there was always kind of basic, more ethical responsibility for any citizen as much as for corporate actors.
Excuse me, may I interject? I'm not sure if at this point, if Professor Demirovic, if you would like to respond to any of the points as they are made. It seems there's several points already. One, do you agree with the characterization of your work as presenting a kind of an ideal type model? The second point worth mentioning, to what extent is the state autonomous, autonomous as you said? Well, I think that's maybe the most...
So maybe then you can select on what you priorities you would want to give to, because this is only a minor point. I think I have more important points.
Okay, but just feel free to interject. I think that's the point at which the discussion will become the most lively and possibly the most...
because the other point is, and you mentioned that, with globalization we have a completely different game, and much of these reconstruction of the democratic rule of law state looks only as at a one-state situation, so to speak, as if there is no globalization at all. And globalization puts, of course, pressure on the political system, puts pressure on democracy, but it's even more severe because, and this is what I tell to our students in our lecture, what we have observed in the past 20 years or so is that a growing part of the world production, of world economy has been shifted outside the rule of law state, outside the reach of democracy. And when you look at the recent, what is published by the Fund for Peace, the Fragile State Index, there you see that half of the world's maps consists of states that are in the categories of warning or even alert. So they are far away from being stable, far away from being democratic rule of law states, but there is where the trade is coming from, the main exporters. When you look at the data of the World Trade Organization, so you see that they have the top 20 exporters, and I think 9 of them are not stable concerning this, and the same is with the locations where the foreign direct investments goes. So there are quite a different situation. These are states, of course, but they are far away from being democratic. Yeah. And our concern then is, well, how can we handle these governance gaps? And actually what we observe is that non-state actors like NGOs, civil society groups, as much as private businesses, they step in and fill the void and produce public goods and provide solutions to public problems, and they do this without any democratic authorization, without any democratic control, and these are political actors. And how do we conceive of this from a, let's say, democratic theory point of view?
Yeah, I think this is maybe a good point to respond to this series of detailed points.
Yeah. Thank you, for these arguments. So my idea is not to come back to the first point. I have not the idea that the state is apt for a design of perfect rules. I mean, I think the state, in my eyes, is a field of conflicts and compromises and negotiations. So the outcome is always imperfect. I mean, in that way, you know. So though I have no idealistic idea, and insofar you are right when you say I have not an idea of an ideal type of what the state is, you know. So I would say what I try to understand is the process why democracy, or a certain specific type of democracy, parliamentarian democracy, is working, and why ruling classes and factions always come back to this. Although in the average, we know that in many capitalist countries, the representative democracy is very weak, and even here in Europe or in the North Atlantic area, it's always threatened, in a way, you know, as we're experiencing it now. I mean, but I would say it's nevertheless a norm that is really important for the self-awareness of our society. So there are only a few people who would allow themselves to say, no, let's get rid of democracy. So
you take it as a normative.
I take it as, how to say, not in
something that is desirable.
Normativistic sense of the word. I take it as a norm that is a practice in our society.
You know, people. It's the least bad.
Huh?
The least bad system.
Sorry?
Didn't you say it was the least bad mode of government?
Right. And so, you know, it's not the idea to say, yes, you know, it's part of our the self-awareness of our social system to have the idea it should be democratic. So, but I do not have I myself a normative in that way, not a normative idea, but then the problem for me is to solve things better. I mean, and I think, I mean, to come to this second point, I think, yes, this is one of the most serious problems discussed since the 90s, the problem of globalization and the pressure, on democracy, because, look, in my eyes, the problem with those people like David Held and others, they try to revitalize the concept of democracy on a higher scale, you know. So the problem of people's sovereignty, of parliamentarism, on a global scale, and so on, and how we can organize elections. And in my eyes, I think, what Ulrich Beck named as sub-politics, the idea that so many decisions are made by corporations, to displace the means of production, to displace and outsource the workplaces, to somewhere. So there is no control over these things. Now the corporations, they continue with their travel from Turkey to Poland, from China to Ethiopia, and so on. So they make a decision. What they do is to make a decision just depending on what is the level of standards, the level of wages, and so on, and what is good for the profit, you know. So and the problem is the national state is not powerful enough from its own concept. It's not powerful enough to solve it, in any respect. So my idea is, okay, we have to intervene at that point where the problems are triggered or generated. you know. So, and I think, where are the problems generated? Basically, they are generated on the level of growth, competitiveness, accumulation, profits, interest rates, and shares. Yeah, so, you know, so, and I think this is something that we have to intervene in to find ways to control these processes, because the people who are in charge of making the decisions, they themselves, they have no clear idea what they're doing. When you think of the finance market crisis in 2008, the most well-known economist in Germany, Hans-Werner Sinn, you know, I mean, he is, in political terms, he is well-known. I don't know how serious he is. He has to be taken in the science, but he said, we didn't know what happened. It's a black swan. Yeah, it's just contingency. We have no idea what's going on. So, and this is, I think we knew it. I mean, we in Attac, we knew it. I'm on the editorial board of a journal, Procla. We published a whole bunch of articles that the crisis will come. Okay, you can always say the crisis, we always say the crisis will come, yes. But, I mean, we are experiencing a really heavy crisis, yeah? Okay, so this is to say okay, you want to...
Well, I'd just like to give Professor Scherer the chance to respond, because it seemed to me you were also making a different point that I'm not sure if you want to expand on about the political role that corporations take on when they're filling a void in states that don't have democratic structures.
Yeah. I mean, as far as I understood, you acknowledge that this is a problem, that all these production processes are shifted beyond the rule of law and outside democratic control. But what should we do? Is it just, it's nice because this allows us to buy the goods cheaper than before? Or is there some need to control it, and if so, in what way? And when you were talking, you often used this rhetoric word, we, and then I thought to myself, well, who is we? Is it you, Germans? Is it we, Swiss? Is it all of us?
All of
who
us.
Is we?
And want to be integrated in the we.
Yeah, and I think what the way David Held and others are trying to establish, let's say, a new political institutionalized layer above the nation-state system. This is where you can conceive of trying to remedy these problems, and it's wait to be seen whether this is possible and how such a system does look like. What we know, it will not look like a nation state, but will be something different. But what we say is that we cannot wait. We cannot wait until such a system is once established. We cannot wait until all these fragile states eventually become democratic, but have to act now. And there we say, okay, it's not that we as theorists have invented this, but rather it's the actors that are confronted with this problem, the NGOs, civil society groups, the companies that are criticized, or some companies that do it because they think it's their moral duty, but they are actually working on this. They're taking on political responsibility and assuming responsibilities that in the traditional model are conceived of as state responsibilities only. And this for us is very interesting. We find that very exciting as a phenomenon to research it, both from a, let's say, through an empirical lens to observe it, to explain it, to see whether it's successful or not, whether it works or not, but also to think of it in a normative sense and to see, well, how do we make sense of this from a democratic legitimatory point of view, yeah? Because neither the NGOs nor the companies, yeah, they are elected or democratically controlled, but what they do, they provide solutions, and in literature this is called a kind of output legitimacy or pragmatic legitimacy, where legitimacy is not derived from from elections or from agreements, but simply from solutions. And this is one, let's say, part of phenomenon we look at, and where we also try to apply these ideas from democratic theory. But we don't not only look at let's say the ethical or legitimatory dimension of democracy, but also we conceive of it as a knowledge creating tool, because democracy has also an epistemic dimension, and this is very apparent when it is about dealing with complex problems or wicked problems, as it is called in the literature. And you quoted Sin and this financial regulation and all these kind of financial innovations that are going on, where actually nobody has the knowledge on how to regulate that and how to anticipate the effects of all these. And there I think we have to reconsider the kind of post-democratic, expert, elite, technocratic kind of regulation that is, and we have to more inclusive forms of regulation.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm going to stop you there just because we want to also have questions from the audience, but I hope we'll come back to that idea of the kind of educative role of democracy. What I think we're going to do now is Lucas and Alice both have microphones, so we would like to invite anyone from the audience who has a question to raise their hand, and they will bring you a microphone. And yes, I think also we can always come back to themes that were raised here in the discussion. So are there any questions? The gentleman at the back.
Hello, my question goes to Mr. Demirovic. Thank you for your presentation. You were speaking about the relationship between production and consumption, which is classically speaking mediated through circulation and distribution. But as far as I understood it, you would stick to the notion of over-determination of production, which is the point where you would interfere. And please correct me if I'm wrong. And concerning this topic, the question or the notion of class war, would you still stick to the classical concept of class war? And if so, which kind of form would it take today? Should we rethink it? And if so, in what way? Thank you.
No, I think, I think go ahead if you don't mind. We have about another 15 minutes to answer questions, so maybe not too long answers.
Okay. No, short. Yes, production is over-determining the whole cycle. Yeah, so we have its distribution, its consumption, its production. And then I think, yes, production is over-determining the whole of the process, but that does not mean, maybe, as you know, that does not mean and has not the consequence to reduce the whole of the process to the level of production. And Yeah, in a way, but this is so misleading, but in a way I would say yes. I stick to the concept of class and also class struggle, yeah. But this is, I mean, this is in itself such a complex problem because I would say, I mean, when you think of what's going on in France or in China, yeah, so you have these 10,000 of strikes and activities. You have this countrywide strike in France. We have the experience of what happened in Greece and in Spain. And many aspects of these struggles, yeah, are struggles against austerity policies, the displacement of fabrics, yeah, and so on to, you know, the headquarters of corporations out of Greece to Bulgaria or other places in Europe. And you could say, yes, I mean, this is a kind of a control over the means of production, the means of subsistence, yeah, so private actors have the control on it and other people are in defense of their livelihood. Yeah, so and I would say, okay, I would name it class conflict, yeah, but to be sure, many of these conflicts and struggles are not seen in the perspective of those people themselves. They do not discuss this or not interpret it in these terms. And this is also something what is in my eyes an important fact. Yeah, I mean, you know, I have not the idea to, how to say, to enlighten these people and say, look, this is how it is. Yeah, so, but to understand what's going on, you know. So, and I mean, I don't know how is it possible to come back to this problem of NGOs because I mean they play a role in this. I mean, an important role because what in my eyes is interesting because of my contacts with the biggest trade union of the world, the IG, the Metal Workers Union in Germany. I mean, has the most members of a trade union worldwide. And they do not have the resources to organize a control of working conditions somewhere else in German corporations. You know, they do not have the resources, not the man or women power, not the money, not the language skills, and so on. So they need the cooperation, the collaboration with those NGOs like Clean Clothes campaign, and these people are very efficient, yeah, because they can have impact on what Walmart is doing and German enterprises are doing in China in wages, standards, working conditions, and so on. And the trade unions are well aware of these things, but the NGOs are not discussing these problems as a class conflict. They discuss it as a civic conflict, yeah, as a problem of civil society conflict. Yeah, we as people from abroad and enlightening and discussing those problems of human rights for Chinese workers and so on. So there are different levels of discussion and yes, I think, okay.
Yeah. Thank you. Are there any more questions? Here at the front, then one at the back. Okay, perhaps you first and then Osher.
Yeah, thank you very much for your presentation. So if I got the concept right, this means like a democratization of the economy. And the democratization of the economy. So economic democracy is more or less, or one important part is the democratization of the economy. And does that imply that citizens can also participate in the economy, like workplace democracy, but on a higher global scale in some respect? But there is there's a well-known empirical finding that citizens, or social groups or socioeconomic groups of citizens are actually not participating at the same rate. So in a political system, the socioeconomic higher classes or citizens participate more frequently and they have more influence. So if this is a fact, how can economic democracy change the functioning at all? Because we can say that these people from higher socioeconomic classes, they would have the same interest as capital owners, and maybe it wouldn't change anything then. Thank you.
I mean, yes, sure, this is one of the big issues of democratic theory, the problem of time as a resource to participate. And we know that people calculate, is it worth to participate? In my eyes, you know, in industry, on the management level, what is not so well discussed is that there is so much participation, ongoing processes, meetings, and so on, yeah? And these costs are never taken into the account, yeah? So the transaction costs, you know, but it's part of what they paid for. And I think participation should be seen as relevant labor. It's part of societal work. I mean, people discuss not only for their private fun, the problem, what is a product, what is the line of production, what should we do for investment, and so on, because all this is relevant for all of us, yeah? I mean, is it the product in terms of chemistry or the duration of a product? Yeah, does it meet our demand or doesn't it? So I think, you know, how to say, just to give you an idea, I mean, the world changed so much during the last decades. When I was a student, we claimed for seeing study, yeah, as gesellschaftliche Arbeit, societal work, you know, because it's part of the innovation of the society. People bring in their lifetime, the knowledge is elaborated, and it's part of what the society will do during the next decades. And I think, yes, people should participate, and the participation is nothing that should be outside the working hours. Let's say 8 hours work, and then, okay, now we participate. It should be part of the process, yeah? And people, I mean, there's a lot of research done in sociology. People, they vote against participation because from the headquarters of the corporations, they are aware that when they participate, they take the burden of responsibility, but they have no control over the parameters, the criteria of that in what they participate in, you know. So I think this should also be part of the process, you know.
Did you have anything you wanted to add, or?
Yes, perhaps to this topic of class struggle, because what is obvious that this has very much changed, and not only, let's say, in the continental political system, where class struggle is not the main concern anymore, and you see that with the diminishing of, let's say, the established parties and the popping up of new parties. And you see it even more in the United States, where now a billionaire is heavily supported by people that we would say, well, these are the lower class people. And I had wondered myself quite a while, why is it so? And for the United States, I have at least one explanation, and this is what in the United States happened. There was this idea, well, we take all these lower class people, working class people, we make them homeowners, we make them shareholders, because all their pension systems is built on shares, so that when critical economic issues are discussed in the media and the newspapers in the US, you don't see the, let's say, the voice of the working class anymore. When critical issues it's about investors, it's about homeowners, and all the lower class people, they feel they are one of them. They are investors, they are invested in shares, they have homes, and so that this divide that was in former times does not exist anymore in this way, and this helped them, to at least pacify American society at this front, while they have, now new fronts in terms of, let's say, the huge income and wealth inequality they have there, and this disparate influence of the elites on one hand, on the political system, and the lower class people on the other. And this is, I think, quite obvious, and also from a, let's say, democratic theory point of view, an interesting case to study.
May I add an argument, what is maybe shed a different light on this problem? Meyerson, an American journalist, he wrote an article a few weeks ago, and he wrote, for the first time in the US history, more than the half of the population is in favor for socialism. Yeah? What is for him an absolute surprise. Yeah, that, you have the media world, yeah, and I mean, of course, like in Germany or maybe in Switzerland, the media, the politicians want people to see themselves as shareholder, as you see every day in the news. The last news is on the finance market development, although it has nothing to do with the economy. But what is interesting that so many people now have sympathy for socialism, and in the sense, of course, of what we would call maybe social democratic Keynesianism and so on. But so I'm not sure if your impression is right with regard to those polls, So we have to know much more about what's going on in the deep, to say, in the everyday life mentality. It's not so clear that people do agree with all what the politicians claim for. In Germany they claim that everybody should buy shares, and people don't. Yeah, they don't want to have these things. And now, I mean, after the two crises in the beginning of 2000 and 2007-08, it's not at all attractive.
Well, it seems like maybe that is a good way to end thinking about the prospects of socialism in the US.
Oh, sure. No, but just...
No, I think, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank both of you very much for speaking here tonight, to thank the audience for your questions. I believe someone is going to speak briefly now about DemocracyNet. So our panel is going to retire. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for giving me the possibility to present another project to you. But maybe I start with a maybe heretical question. Who does not understand German among you? Okay, 3 people. So I continue in German because the project is mainly in German. So I apologize to you that you maybe not understand everything or nothing. Even you understand this one here, Reclaim Democracy. Das ist der Titel eines großen Kongresses, den wir im Februar 2012 organisieren an der Universität Basel. Und zwar tun wir das, wenn ich wir sage, dann ist das Denknetz Schweiz, das diesen Kongress organisiert, zusammen in Kooperation mit einer ganzen Zeile von anderen Organisationen. Muss ich da irgendwie, hier kann ich da draufdrücken, nehme ich an. Ja. Auf die ich noch zu sprechen komme. Was ist die Absicht dieses Kongresses? Der Kongress ist nicht nur eine theoretische Veranstaltung, sondern wie der Name schon sagt, Reclaim, Claim, ein Kongress, der auch einlädt zu fordern, der ein Anliegen hat. Und dieses Anliegen, wenn wir das noch klarer benennen, sind diese 3 Dinge hier. Der erste Schwerpunkt des Kongresses ist die Aussage, Demokratie ist substanziell oder sie ist nicht. Meine Demokratie heißt, dass die Leute in demokratischen Prozessen ernsthafte Dinge entscheiden können müssen, echte Gestaltung der Lebensverhältnisse bewirken können müssen, sonst ist Demokratie eine leere Hülse. Und in den letzten Jahrzehnten haben wir eine Aushöhlung demokratischer Prozesse erlebt. Es geht darum, sie wieder zurückzuholen und vielleicht auch auszudehnen. Das ist die erste Aussage. Die zweite zentrale Aussage, die wir machen, ist, Demokratie basiert auf Menschenrechten oder sie ist nicht. Eine Demokratie, die nicht auf Menschenrechten basiert, akzeptiert nicht die wesentliche Grundlage, dass alle Menschen in gleicher Weise an der Gestaltung ihrer Lebensverhältnisse teilhaben können. Und in einer globalisierten Welt muss das auch weltweit eingefordert werden als große Zielrichtung. Und all die völkischen, ethnischen Konzepte von Demokratie, die von rechts heute vorgetragen werden, im Stil von SVP ist das Volk. Und das sind sicher nur die guten Schweizerinnen und Schweizer, die seit mehreren Generationen ausschließlich Schweizerdeutsch gelebt haben. Solche Konzepte widersprechen der Demokratie selbst. Und die dritte Aussage ist dann, Demokratie ist Praxis, ist soziale Praxis. Das heißt, der Kongress selbst soll auch ein demokratisches Ereignis sein und demokratische Anliegen aufnehmen und fördern. Die Partnerorganisationen des Kongresses sehen Sie hier, das sind 4 universitäre Institute, es sind eine Reihe von NGOs wie zum Beispiel ATTAC oder Décroissance oder Multiwatch und so weiter. Und es ist auch die Organisation, die diesen Anlass hier organisiert hat. Jetzt muss ich schauen, dass ich es richtig sage. DemocracyNet.eu, ist das richtig? Ihr seid auch dabei, was mich sehr freut. Jetzt noch 2 Worte zur Organisation, die diesen Kongress wesentlich trägt. Das Denknetz. Das Denknetz ist ein Think Tank mit gegenwärtig 1100 Mitgliedern. Es ist ein Verein, es ist ein Think Tank von unten, der von niemandem Aufträge bekommt, sondern sich selbst organisiert und auch selbst die Themen gibt. Es sind rund 100 Leute aktiv in verschiedenen Gruppen, sehr viele Fachgruppen, 7 Fachgruppen, die zurzeit tätig sind, wie zum Beispiel die Fachgruppe Sozialpolitik, Arbeit und Care Economy, die hier jetzt unter das Bild geraten ist, oder auch eine Fachgruppe politische Ökonomie. Wir publizieren, das ist eine normale Tätigkeit von solchen Organisationen, zum Beispiel gerade diese 3 Bücher, die aktuell sind, die auch hier vorne aufliegen, und wir organisieren Veranstaltungen, wir gehen aber auch an die Ränder der Politik, machen politische Reformvorschläge und geben die dann in die aktive Politik hinein. Selbst sind wir nicht politisch aktiv im eigentlichen Sinne, weil wir sonst zu einer Partei würden und das wäre nicht sinnvoll. Mitgliedschaft kostet 100 Franken im Jahr, 40 Franken für Leute, die wenig verdienen, und unsere Mitglieder bekommen alle die Publikationen, das sind 2 bis 3 Bücher im Jahr, gratis, kostenlos zugeschickt, plus weitere Informationen, plus Reduktionen bei Veranstaltungen und so weiter. Man kann auch mitwirken bei uns. Wer interessiert ist an Denknetz, der kann mich gerne dann noch ansprechen, nach der Veranstaltung bei dem Piano. Ja, das sind zwei der aktuellen Publikationen. Eines hat sich bezogen auf eine Abstimmung, die jetzt schon vorbei ist, aber das Thema ist sicher nicht erledigt. Das ist die Frage des bedingungslosen Grundeinkommens und die Frage von, was geschieht jetzt, wie können wir die Anliegen dieser Initiative in die Politik hineintragen. Das andere Buch beschäftigt sich mit Dingen, die auch mit dem Thema Wirtschaftsdemokratie und Demokratie überhaupt zu tun haben, nämlich mit der Frage, inwiefern der Neoliberalismus in den letzten Jahrzehnten nicht nur Demokratie ausgehöhlt hat, sondern eben nicht nur auch den Staat in bestimmten Bereichen schwächt oder umformt, sondern so etwas wie das Gemeinwesen, die gemeinschaftlichen Aufgaben der Gesellschaft aushöhlt, auch keine Konzepte mehr dafür hat und Dinge eben dann bewirkt, die wir heute erleben, wie zum Beispiel Failed States, die entstehen ja nicht einfach zufällig. Das sind die aktuellen Bücher. Ich danke fürs Interesse. Wir haben auch Flyer hier, die Sie mitnehmen können für diesen Demokratiekongress und vielleicht sehen wir uns nächstes Jahr in Basel. Vielen Dank.